Today I want to just ramble on about weatherboarding, and there's several different types of it, and there's a right and a wrong way of fixing it to the side of a timber building. Now this boarding here is 7-inch feather edge, so we'll have a look at feather edge in a minute. But if you notice, and we'll zoom in, there's one nail there, okay, and there's no other nail in this board. There's a stud there, part of the timber frame, and the boards are nailed to it, but one nail there, and there's one nail in the next board above. That's important, very important, because if you put another nail here, then the board is fixed in two places, and what with expansion and contraction of temperature and moisture content, then this board can do this. But if it's nailed there, then it's quite likely that it splits between the two. So only one nail, and we'll go into that a bit later. Now this is feather edge board, and as you can see, it is wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. So this is 7 by 1.25" feather edge, which means that it's 7 inches top to bottom, and it was initially cut out of a piece of 1.25" board on the angle. Alright, here's another timber frame building, but it's got a slightly different weatherboarding on this, so let's go and have a look. And I've just exposed the ends of these boards, and as you'll see, they're 6.5 by inch straight cut boards, and they were cut on my big rack saw. If you want to cut feather edge boards, you need a power feed and quite a good bandsaw, so that big old circular of mine just won't do it. So this is what you do instead, and if you're buying it, it's cheaper to buy straight cut boards than feather edge. So we've got bits of insulation poking in amongst this, but let's have a look. There's the nail, hopefully you can see that. What happens is the nail goes through the outside board and just misses the top of the board below. So effectively the outside board clamps the top of the board below. So the board below doesn't need nailing at the top. Again, it's nailed at the bottom and just misses the board below, so it clamps it in situation. Now these are inch boards, so the nail's going through 1 inch and then missing the top of the board below, which is another inch. So these are 4-inch galvanized wire nails. So you need nails big enough, but you don't need as many. Hopefully that makes some sense. And then of course, once you've fitted it all, you cover the end of that to keep the beasties out, like that. Just a cover strip, 1.5" by 3/4. It could do being slightly wider to cover this end grain here, but there you go. Now, how do you set the boards out? So these are 6.5 by inch boards, and the overlap is 1.5 inches. It's a good amount of overlap to try and keep the draft out and to allow for expansion and contraction, all sorts of things, especially if you're going to be putting these boards up fresh sawn, so they're green, so they will shrink a bit. So the cover, which is the visible area, and it's the cover that you use to work out how many boards you need, is 5 inches. So we must write that down, So to start setting this out, first of all you put the bottom board on. Now because these are square boards, square cut boards, I've got a little batten fitted up underneath there. It's a bit of inch batten just to kick this bottom board out so it matches the rest. But then you fit this one and you level it up. Make sure you're happy, stand back and have a look. So having fitted the first board, you use these, a pair of what you would loosely call jigs. Now I've just made these again because I can't find the ones that I used for this when I was doing this building, but that notch there is equal to the cover of the board, so in this case that's 5 inch. So assume that this board here isn't there, and what you do is you just tack that on there, okay, and you'll tack one on over there, this other one. That supports the next board and sets the cover. So you fit one here and fit one over there, put the next board in place, nail the next board in place, making sure the ends are dead square, yeah? And then these can just get pulled off again because the nail is not all the way in. So you use a pair of jigs or gauges like this to set all the boards out. Not only does it set the cover, but it also helps you support the boards, and you slowly build up like that. And then occasionally, if you were using this one at this end, you would swap it round just in case there's a slight anomaly, and then on you go. So it just makes it easy. There's no measuring or anything, you just use these two. Let's assume we need to work out how many boards and therefore how many cubic feet of timber you need to cover this piece of wall between the edge of that door and the edge of that window. I'm using those because it'll be easier. If you were doing the whole wall, then you would measure the whole wall, work out the area, and then remove the area of the window. But let's not complicate things. So I'm just going to take the measurements of that piece of wall. And of course you can buy timber in various ways, and we're talking from a local sawmill, not from your local builders merchants where the timber's been imported. When you buy from a local sawmill, you can get a price per board or per foot or per cubic foot, and it's quite easy if you phone a sawmill up and say how much is 6x1 sawn Douglas fir, and they'll go it's £10 a cubic foot or £12 a cubic foot. Then you can work backwards and you know exactly what's going on. So price per cubic foot is quite flexible. Price per foot run is equally easy, but then you're asking them to work it out for you. Okay, let's see how we get on with this. There are several parts of this arithmetic. First of all, there's working out how many pieces of 6x1 a foot long will fit into a cubic foot of timber. Imagine you've got a cubic foot of timber. Let's bring that down there. So if you want 12-inch boards, then you'd have, by an inch thick, you'd have 12 boards stacked together, and therefore there would be because that is 12 inches, being a cubic foot, there will be 12 boards. So there'll be 12 board foot to the cubic foot. Okay, interestingly enough, the Americans deal with board feet, but we're talking 6.5 the width of the board. So it's 6.5 wide by 1 inch thick, but we can work it out because it's all to do with the surface area of that board in relationship to the surface area of that square foot. That's 12 by 12, so that's 144 square inches. That is 6.5 by 1, so 6.5 times 1 is 6.5, so that's 6.5 square inches. That's the surface area of there. Okay, so what we have is 144, that's square inches per square foot, divided by 6.5, 6.5 square inches, which is in that 6.5 by 1 board, and that equals 22.2 board feet or foot run per cubic foot. Hopefully that makes sense. So we know how many foot run to the cubic foot, because if that's a foot deep, it's 22.2 board feet. That's confusing to Americans. Foot run to the cubic foot. Okay, so now we need to work out the amount of boards we need for that wall area. So let's just move over here. So it's 86 inches high and 5 inch of cover per board, so it's 86 divided by 5 equals 17.2. So in the spirit of always ordering a bit more, let's call that 18. So we want 18 boards. Okay, the wall is 80 inches wide. I'm just checking we're always in the camera here. So it's 80 inches high, 80 inches of board multiplied by 18 equals 1440 inches. So you divide that by 12, yeah, and that equals 120 feet, or foot run. So the next part is we have 120 foot run and we have 22.2 foot run to the cubic foot. So we just divide 120 divided by 22.2, which equals 5.4 cubic feet. And again, in the spirit of always ordering a bit more, equals 6 cubic feet, unless of course you're adding this to another bit of a list of areas that you're going to cover, in which case you wouldn't compound more and more and more, but you would add 10% onto the end to allow for the fact that you might lose 6 inches or a foot off the end of a board, because they always have to stop on a piece of timber framing or a stud, so you lose a bit off the end of each board. So there you go. And of course, buying timber in the UK, buy it fresh sawn from a local sawmill. And to some extent, that's what this book's about. Local timber.